Okay, so have you ever felt like you're trying to catch curveballs, but life just keeps throwing them faster and faster?
Yeah.
Or maybe it feels like you're in a maze, but like the walls are constantly shifting.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone can relate to that feeling at some point.
Well, that feeling of chaos and uncertainty, that's what we're diving into today with Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life.
That's right.
And, you mentioned wanting to explore these big ideas without getting completely overwhelmed. And that's what we're going for today.
Yeah, a clear path through the core concepts.
Exactly.
Beyond Order is interesting right from the start because it's not really about adding more rules and structures to our already kind of complicated lives.
Right.
It's more about understanding this really fundamental dynamic between the order that we try to create
Right.
and the chaos that just seems to inevitably emerge,
Right.
and how navigating that dynamic maybe with more awareness can help us be more psychologically resilient
Yeah.
and lead to a stronger sense of purpose.
So not like a self-help checklist.
Yeah.
We're not just listing rules.
Exactly, not just a to-do list.
We're going deeper into the why behind them.
Yeah, the underlying principles.
Yeah, and drawing directly from Peterson's insights from Beyond Order.
Yeah.
His own personal experiences and the really thought-provoking psychological angles he brings to the table.
Right. He's got a really unique way of looking at things.
You were looking for those aha moments.
Yes, and hopefully lots of them.
And we're going to unpack those together as we go.
Let's get those aha moments.
Okay, so before we break down each rule, let's just get a bird's eye view of the big themes that run through Beyond Order.
Okay, good idea.
We're talking about the need for societal structures to evolve.
Right, to adapt to changing times.
The process of integrating different parts of ourselves.
Becoming whole.
The benefits of stepping outside our comfort zones.
Which can be a little scary, but often very rewarding.
And that big idea of personal responsibility as the foundation of a meaningful life.
Right, that's a big one for Peterson.
It's huge for him.
And it's important to remember that these aren't presented as like strict rules you must follow.
Right, not commandments.
More like guiding principles.
Right.
Tools to help us deal with the uncertainty and the complexity of life,
Right.
And maybe a framework for finding stability and meaning in a world that's constantly changing.
All right, let's jump into Rule I, which is describe what you see and enumerate your assumptions.
Okay, a good one to start with.
So when Peterson talks about describing what you see, he really starts by emphasizing this link between stable social structures and our individual psychological well-being.
Yeah, why is that connection so important?
Right. Why is that?
Think of it this way. Established social structures.
Yeah.
Like laws, customs, and shared norms.
Right. The things we often take for granted.
Right. They provide us with a sense of predictability and a shared understanding of how the world works.
Right. So we kind of know what to expect.
Exactly. And this framework lets individuals operate in a relatively stable environment, which reduces uncertainty and anxiety.
Right? It's like having a map in a new city.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
It doesn't tell you every turn,
Not a strict set of directions.
but it gives you a sense of where you are.
Right, it helps you orient yourself.
And how to get around.
Exactly, and with less stress.
So these structures provide a foundation.
They do, but they're not static.
Right. And Peterson argues that these structures need to be constantly updated to stay vital.
Right, to keep up with the times.
How does that actually happen?
So that's where the dynamic element comes in.
Right.
Stable structures are necessary, but they can also become rigid, outdated, or they might fail to address new challenges and, circumstances that are always evolving.
Right. The world is constantly changing.
Exactly. And creative individuals, they come in and they start questioning the existing assumptions. They propose new ideas and they challenge the status quo, and they act as catalysts for this necessary evolution.
So you shake things up a bit.
Yeah, they're the disruptors.
So for you, the listener right now,
yes, you listening right now.
how might this idea of describing what you see and questioning assumptions apply to your own life or maybe even your work?
That's a great question.
Think about areas where maybe you're feeling stuck or where progress is slow or those old ways of doing things aren't working anymore.
Right, maybe it's time for a fresh perspective.
This first rule encourages you to take a step back and look at your situation objectively.
Without judgment.
Yeah, just describe what you see.
See it for what it is.
And then examine the assumptions that are behind your approach.
The things you're taking for granted.
Are those assumptions still valid?
Or are they outdated?
Could a fresh perspective questioning those norms a creative adaptation?
Be the key to moving forward.
Yeah, could that be it?
It's about seeing clearly before you act.
Okay, so let's move to Rule 2.
All right.
Which is imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that.
Love this one.
Peterson brings in this centuries-old alchemical image as a metaphor for the integrated human personality.
Yeah, it's a really powerful image.
What's the message there?
So the alchemists were obsessed with this idea of the philosopher's stone.
Right, turning lead into gold.
Yeah, that was the literal goal.
Right.
But over time, it became more of a metaphor for personal transformation.
Right, the inner gold.
Exactly. And the images associated with alchemy often depict these different elements like fire, water, earth, air, coming together in this harmonious way.
Right.
It's like a visual representation of integration.
That's like our own personality.
Yeah. We have all these different aspects. Sometimes they conflict.
Yeah.
And the process of becoming whole is about acknowledging, understanding, and then integrating them.
So it's striving for that inner goal.
Exactly.
Now, Peterson dives into Jung's concepts, ego, shadow, animus, and self, and contrasts them with Freud's id-ego and superego.
Yeah, two big names in psychology.
For someone who's not familiar with all of that.
Right. It can be a lot to take in.
What's the key distinction Peterson's highlighting?
So both Freud and Jung had a huge impact on how we understand the human psyche. But their models differed in some pretty significant ways.
Right.
Freud's model focused on the interplay between these primal drives, the id,
Right.
and the conscious awareness, the ego,
Right.
and the internalized rules of society, the superego.
Okay.
Jung's model, while also acknowledging these different parts of the psyche,
Yeah.
placed more emphasis on the unconscious and this journey towards what he called individuation, becoming a whole and integrated self.
Right. And Peterson leans more towards Jung.
He does. He really resonates with Jung's idea of the self as this potential for wholeness
Right.
that integrates both the conscious and unconscious aspects of our being.
Right. So both are important.
Exactly.
But then he goes on to emphasize that this internal integration isn't just an inward journey.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Right. Why does he bring in this external dimension?
Because he argues that we are fundamentally social creatures.
Right.
Our psychological well-being is completely intertwined with our interactions and relationships within a community.
So we can't do it alone.
We need each other. Right. Our sense of self, our values, our understanding of the world, all of that is shaped through social interaction.
So social interaction is essential.
Absolutely. It's how we learn and grow.
And he talks about social consensus on behavior established through communication negotiation, this implicit social contract.
It's like an unspoken agreement.
Right. And that provides the external structure that supports our internal psychological stability.
Think about it. Shared norms around respect, honesty, cooperation.
Right.
They create a more predictable and trustworthy social environment.
Right. So we feel safer.
Exactly. And that reduces anxiety and fosters a sense of belonging and purpose.
It's like we need that external mirroring.
We do. We need to see ourselves reflected in the eyes of others.
Right. And that validation helps us thrive.
Exactly. We're not meant to be isolated.
And then he talks about how functional hierarchies emerge.
Yeah, the natural order of things.
And the role of language in shaping our perception of value within those hierarchies.
It's fascinating how societies organize themselves based on competence.
Right, the ability to solve problems.
Those who are skilled, responsible, and can really contribute.
They rise to the top.
Yeah, they often do.
And language plays a crucial role.
It's the tool we use to communicate, negotiate, and determine what we value as a society.
So language is power.
In a way, it is.
Through language, we express our needs, our abilities.
We tell our stories.
We establish standards.
And this shared understanding of value helps organize both our social world and our individual sense of where we fit in.
Right. It helps us understand our place.
Exactly. For example, think about a team project at work.
Okay.
Those who consistently do good work and communicate effectively.
They become the leaders.
They often do.
And language is how that value is recognized.
And reinforced.
Okay, let's shift gears now to Rule 3.
Okay.
Do not hide unwanted things in the fog.
Ooh, that sounds deep.
This feels like a direct call to face those negative emotions we try so hard to avoid.
Yeah, those uncomfortable truths.
Right. Is that what he's getting at?
Exactly. Peterson is warning us against this really common human tendency to suppress, ignore, or explain away those painful emotions.
Sadness, anxiety, fear, resentment, all that stuff.
All of it.
Right.
He uses this metaphor of fog to describe that state of willful ignorance. Like we're refusing to acknowledge these feelings and hoping they'll just disappear on their own.
But they don't.
They rarely do.
He gives an example of a client in therapy who was very quiet at first,
Yeah.
but then started making progress once he began articulating those negative issues.
It's a powerful example of what can happen when we bring those things hidden in the fog out into the light.
Right. So what does that tell us about the dangers of hiding?
It shows us that avoidance isn't a solution.
Right.
The client's silence was a way to protect himself from pain.
Right.
But it also prevented him from processing those experiences and ultimately healing.
Right.
Once he found the courage to voice those difficult truths, he could begin to make sense of them.
And start to move on.
Exactly. And it highlights how those unresolved emotional issues,
When they're left unaddressed,
they can fester
it really can.
and negatively impact our well-being, our relationships, our personal growth.
So it's not worth hiding from them.
It's better to face them head on.
And he also points out that sometimes sharp or insulting remarks can function as a defense mechanism
Yeah, like a way to create more fog.
and avoid those painful truths in relationships.
Think about those moments in arguments when someone just lashes out.
Right.
It's not always just anger.
Right.
Sometimes it's a way to deflect from a deeper, more vulnerable truth.
Something they don't want to face.
Exactly. And that sharp remark, it creates distance, shuts down the conversation,
Right.
keeps the focus away from the real issue.
So it's a smokescreen.
It is. It's a way to obscure the problem.
And while it might offer temporary relief,
A quick fix,
it prevents real communication.
and ultimately resolution,
Right.
leading to more resentment and disconnection in the long run.
And he talks about the risks of resentment.
Yeah, resentment can be so corrosive. And this lack of courage to trust that often fuels this hiding.
How are those connected?
It's a vicious cycle, you see.
Right.
When we avoid confronting our emotions and communicating them honestly,
Right.
those feelings fester and turn into resentment.
Right. Because we feel unheard.
Exactly. We feel like we've been wronged.
Right.
And then that resentment makes us want to hide even more.
Because it's too painful to face.
Yeah, because admitting the source of our resentment might require us to confront some difficult truths about ourselves or others.
Which is scary.
It takes courage to step out of that fog
Right.
and engage with those emotions directly.
It takes trust in ourselves and in our relationships.
Exactly. It's about believing that we can handle the discomfort and potentially find a resolution.
So what's the alternative to hiding in the fog?
The alternative is to cultivate the courage to acknowledge and admit to your feelings,
Even the ones that feel embarrassing.
even the ones that make you cringe.
Right. Or seem trivial.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean dwelling in negativity, though, right?
No, not at all. It just means being honest with yourself,
Right.
recognizing and naming those emotions as they come up.
Right.
It's like looking directly into the fog and seeing what's really there,
Even if it's uncomfortable.
even if it's scary.
And that act of honesty is the first step towards understanding those feelings, communicating them, and ultimately navigating them in a healthier way. It's about choosing clarity over avoidance.
Exactly. Facing the truth head on.
Okay, let's move to Rule 4. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated.
Another good one.
It's got to be a unique perspective, right?
Yeah, it's about seeing potential in the things that others have neglected.
Right. So finding the diamonds in the rough.
Exactly. Peterson argues that when people or groups don't take ownership of tasks or shy away from challenges,
Or just neglect their responsibilities.
they create these vacuums.
Right.
And those vacuums become opportunities for those who are willing to step up and take charge.
To fill that void.
Yeah, those things that are left undone are often difficult and maybe a little risky, but that's often where the biggest rewards are.
It's like seeing a problem as a chance to shine.
Yeah, exactly. Not a burden, but an opportunity.
He tells that story about the waiter who changed his attitude about his job and ended up getting promoted.
Classic example of this rule in action.
Right. How does that illustrate the principle?
This waiter, instead of just going through the motions or complaining about his job,
Right.
decided to take ownership of his role,
Right.
do his duties with care.
Go above and beyond.
Yeah, exceed expectations.
And by embracing that responsibility.
Even in a seemingly low-level position.
Right.
He demonstrated initiative and made himself valuable.
And it led to recognition.
It
And
did.
advancement.
So sometimes opportunity isn't about finding a new fancy position.
Right.
Sometimes it's about transforming your current situation
By taking ownership.
and looking for ways to contribute.
And then he contrasts this with Peter Pan,
Yeah, the boy who never grew up.
who refuses to grow up and take on responsibility.
Right.
And Captain Hook, who's obsessed with control and terrified of time.
Interesting comparison.
Right. What's this to do with?
Peter Pan represents this endless potential, but without the commitment to actually do anything with it.
Right, so he stays stuck.
Stuck in a state of arrested development.
Unable to contribute to the world.
Yeah.
And Captain Hook?
He's the opposite.
Sure.
He's desperately trying to control everything.
Because he's afraid.
He's terrified of the consequences of his own inaction.
Right, so both are negative examples.
Yeah, Peterson is saying that potential without action and responsibility can become a negative thing.
Right.
Leading to a life that lacks purpose and fulfillment.
Right.
It's like a cautionary tale.
And then he brings in this ancient Egyptian myth about Horus.
Oh, yeah, the Shiro archetype.
Right, and how he saw opportunity in the abdication of responsibility by Set.
Set, who usurped the throne.
Right. Can you unpack that for us?
Okay, so Set taking the throne from Osiris, that represents a breakdown of order.
Right.
A shirking of responsibility.
And Horus, the rightful heir,
yeah.
doesn't give up.
No, he sees this as an opportunity, a challenge to restore balance.
So he rises to the occasion.
Exactly.
And his symbols, the eye and the falcon.
The eye representing vision.
Right.
And the falcon representing action.
Embody this heroic capacity to recognize and seize those opportunities.
When others have failed to step up.
It's about having the courage to act.
When it's needed most.
And he talks about this instinct for meaning.
Right. This drive we all have.
That directs us towards those appropriate challenges.
And the acceptance of responsibility.
How does this instinct actually work?
So the instinct for meaning is this deep human drive.
Right.
To do things that feel significant and purposeful.
Things that matter.
Things that align with our values.
Right. And it guides us towards challenges that are neither too overwhelming.
Not too easy, not too hard,
Right.
but just right.
Goldilocks challenges.
Exactly. And when we feel that sense of meaning,
Right.
it often involves taking responsibility and making things better.
Contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's about facing those difficult realities, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to make a difference.
To confront the monster in the abyss.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
It's about becoming who we're meant to be.
Okay, let's move on to Rule V. Do not do what you hate.
Ooh, another one that seems straightforward.
But I'm sure there's more to it.
There always is with Peterson.
So it's not just about avoiding unpleasant tasks.
No, it's deeper than that.
Right.
Peterson is talking about a profound aversion to something that violates your sense of integrity or truth.
Things that go against your core values.
Yeah, things that feel wrong.
He brings up this story about a debate over a flip chart in a corporate setting.
Yeah, that one always makes me chuckle.
It sounds so trivial.
It does.
Why does he even bring it up?
Because it's an example of how seemingly small things can be symptoms of deeper issues.
Like power struggles.
Yeah, or a disconnect between values and actions.
And he's saying that ignoring these small sources of irritation
Those things we hate doing.
can be a mistake
Yeah, they can build up.
and lead to bigger problems,
It's about paying attention to those red flags,
even if they seem small.
even if they seem insignificant.
And then he tells a story about a client who stood up against what she saw as ideological maneuvering at work.
Yes, a much more serious example.
What were the consequences for her?
Well, by refusing to participate in these debates that she felt were disingenuous,
Right.
she actually regained a sense of agency.
Right.
She overcame her fear.
And found that her perspective resonated with others.
Who felt the same way.
It's about aligning your actions with your values.
Exactly, even if it's uncomfortable.
And Peterson references Nietzsche and Dostoevsky here.
Two heavy hitters.
Right.
Warning about the dangers of collectivism.
And the importance of individual value creation.
Yeah, how does that connect?
Right? How does that fit in?
While they were worried about collectivist ideologies suppressing individual expression and the pursuit of meaning.
Right. So they saw the individual as paramount.
And Peterson is saying that if you participate in things that violate your values,
Right.
you can end up feeling like life has no meaning.
Right.
So by identifying what you value and creating that value in the world,
Right.
you resist that nihilism.
And he even suggests that value might be an intrinsic part of reality.
Yeah, this is where he gets a bit philosophical.
He does.
He acknowledges the power of science.
Right.
But he says a purely materialistic worldview might miss those subjective experiences.
Like value, meaning, and purpose.
Right.
He's saying those are real too.
They are.
And that metaphorical descriptions can offer insights that science might miss.
Right. There's more to reality than just what we can measure.
Okay, and lastly in this rule, he critiques the isism theorist.
Oh, yeah. The oversimplification problem.
What dangers does he see there?
He's saying that people who rigidly adhere to a particular ideology...
Like Marxism or feminism?
Right.
Often oversimplify complex problems.
Yeah, they try to fit everything into their framework.
And they might attribute everything to a single cause.
Right. One-size-fits-all explanations.
which ignores the nuances.
And the complexities of reality.
And this can lead to demonizing other viewpoints.
And creating divisions.
So it's about being open to multiple perspectives.
Yeah, not getting trapped in an ideological box.
Okay, let's move on to Rule 7. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens.
Another one that sounds deceptively simple.
Right, but there's always depth.
There is.
So what's he getting at here?
It's about the transformative power of focused effort.
Right.
He uses this analogy of coal turning into a diamond under pressure.
Yeah.
Just like those carbon atoms are reorganized into a more valuable structure.
Right.
Dedicating yourself to something worthwhile can refine your abilities and reveal new possibilities.
It's about pushing yourself to grow.
Exactly.
And he makes his point about how clear, well-defined goals can reduce suffering, anxiety, and stress.
How does that work?
Right. How does that happen?
Well, clear goals give us a sense of direction and purpose.
Which simplifies our often overwhelming lives.
Right. We're not just flailing around.
Exactly. And when you have something specific to aim for,
Right.
it focuses your attention and reduces that feeling of being lost or pulled in different directions.
So we feel more in control.
We do, and that reduces anxiety and stress.
Because we're making progress.
Exactly.
It's like having a destination on a map.
Yeah, even if the journey is tough.
You know where we're going.
And why?
And he shares this observation from his graduate school days.
About the students who persevered through this really tough program.
What's the takeaway there?
He noticed that those who stuck with it
Right.
developed stronger character.
They were transformed by the challenge.
They were. It suggests that confronting and mastering difficult tasks can lead to real growth.
Right. It builds resilience.
And a stronger sense of self.
It's like forging steel.
Yeah, the heat makes it stronger.
And he says that discipline, when it's a choice, actually enhances our potential rather than restricting it.
That's an important distinction.
It is. Discipline isn't about suppressing ourselves.
Right.
It's about channeling our energy.
Towards a purpose.
Exactly. Think of aggression.
Okay.
Undisciplined aggression can be destructive,
Right.
but channeled productively.
Yeah.
It can become determination,
Right.
the drive to overcome obstacles.
So discipline helps us organize our potential.
Exactly.
And he connects this to the idea of morality.
Yeah, the big picture.
And even the historical role of Christianity.
So how does that all fit together?
Right. How do those pieces connect?
Morality for Peterson is a set of principles that help us cooperate.
Right. And live harmoniously.
Exactly.
And he sees Christianity as having played a role in establishing those values.
Right.
Especially in Europe.
Historically, yes.
And then he connects this to the idea of working hard on one thing.
By saying that striving to live by a moral code
Right.
requires effort.
And discipline.
And that dedication benefits both us as individuals.
And society as a whole.
Exactly. It's a
And
win-win.
he ends this rule with that direct instruction.
Pick one thing
Work hard.
and see what happens.
So simple but powerful.
It is because it encourages us to learn through experience,
Right.
to actually put in the effort and see what comes of it.
And then reflect on the results.
That's where the real learning happens.
Okay, let's talk about Rule 8.
Hmm.
Try to make one room in your home as beautiful as possible.
Oh, I love this one.
It builds on his earlier advice to clean your room.
Right, but it goes further.
Yeah, it's not just about order, it's about beauty.
Exactly. It's about transforming a space into something that resonates with you aesthetically
That brings you joy.
and reflects your sense of harmony.
It's about adding meaning.
Beyond just functionality.
And Peterson admits here that even his own office gets messy sometimes.
Yeah, it's a relatable struggle.
Right, even he has trouble maintaining perfect order.
He does.
Why do you think he shares that?
I think it's to make the advice feel more attainable.
Right,
He's not presenting himself as someone who has it all figured out.
right. He's human like the rest of us.
We all struggle with mess sometimes.
And he's saying that even making one small space beautiful can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, it can expand to other areas of your life.
How did that work?
Well, by engaging with aesthetic principles
Right.
and paying attention to detail,
Yeah.
you're essentially training yourself to appreciate beauty.
In all its forms.
And that can influence how you see the world.
Right, it can make you more attuned to the beauty that's already there.
Exactly. And he connects this to the immortality of childhood.
That's an interesting phrase.
It is.
What does he mean by that?
He's talking about that childlike wonder,
Right, that sense of awe.
that direct connection to the beauty and mystery of existence.
And he says that adults often lose that.
We get caught up in our routines and responsibilities.
So creating beauty can be A way to reconnect with that.
Yeah, to tap back into that childlike sense of wonder.
And he references Wordsworth and Blake here.
Two great poets.
Right. Wordsworth lamenting the loss of that vision.
Yeah.
And Blake trying to hold on to it.
Yeah, seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary.
And then he talks about the fear that can lead to the imprisonment of art.
Right, the fear of the unknown.
But then he emphasizes the unique worth of beauty.
Yeah, so what's the connection there?
Right. How does that fit in?
Well, he's saying that truly profound art can be scary.
Right.
It challenges our assumptions.
It makes us uncomfortable.
And that can make people want to control it.
To censor it.
Yeah, to shut it down.
But he's saying that the very reason art is so valuable
is because it captures something essential about the human experience.
Right.
To suppress art out of fear is to deny ourselves those insights.
And then he quotes Walt Whitman.
Yeah, about experiencing the origin of all poems.
Right, and possessing the good of the earth directly.
And what's the significance of that?
Right. How does that relate to our homes?
Well, Whitman's talking about a direct connection to the source of creativity and goodness.
Right.
And creating beauty in our homes can be a way to foster that connection.
It's like creating a microcosm of that.
Exactly, a space where we can connect with beauty and experience harmony.
A sanctuary.
Yeah, a place to nourish the soul.
And Peterson describes the artist as being on the border of understanding.
Right. Transforming chaos into order.
He even calls them the initial agents of civilization.
That's an interesting thought.
How does that relate to making a room beautiful?
Well, just like artists take something formless and give it structure.
Right.
We can do the same in our homes.
By taking a cluttered space and making it harmonious?
Exactly. It's like we're imposing order on chaos.
We're bringing beauty into the world.
And it's a fundamental human impulse.
Right. We're wired for it.
We are.
And he warns against the totalitarian tactic of using art for political agendas.
Yeah, art shouldn't be a tool for propaganda.
Right. It should be free.
He's saying that true art comes from a place of authenticity.
Right. Not from following a doctrine.
Exactly.
And then he talks about his experience collecting Soviet-era paintings.
With his wife, Tammy, and
Yeah.
finding beauty in them.
Even though they were often propaganda?
It's a reminder that beauty can exist in unexpected places.
Right.
And that the human spirit's desire for beauty is incredibly resilient.
It's like beauty can transcend ideology.
It can.
And he uses the analogy of a wild beast with a red spot
That's a vivid image.
to illustrate the danger of standing out too much.
Without the proper context or defense.
So how does that relate to art?
Well, he's saying that art, that's too different.
Too far outside the mainstream.
Can be vulnerable to rejection.
Right, people might not understand it,
Or appreciate it.
but unlike the wildebeest,
Art can actually change people's perceptions over time.
like the Impressionists,
Exactly. They were ridiculed at first.
but now they're beloved.
So it's a delicate balance.
Between originality and resonance.